There's a moment of pure instinct in every meal. A basket of steaming fries lands before you, golden and irresistible. Your hand reaches automatically for that plastic bottle, familiar, comforting, shaped for a single purpose. You squeeze. A glossy red ribbon pools across the plate, and you don't think twice. It's just ketchup, harmless, ordinary, the least mysterious thing in your kitchen, because what you're holding is not as simple as you believe. Behind that bright, artificial smile of flavor lies a tale stretching back more than 1,000 years, across oceans, across cultures, through imperial courts and filthy markets, into laboratories where scientists once promised miracles and delivered scandal instead. This condiment, this tiny act of taste we perform without thought, is actually a story of human reinvention, of cravings and power and deception dressed up as dinner. It begins far from any American diner. Imagine the humid docks of ancient China, ships creaking under a haze of salt and fish. Sailors crowd around wooden barrels, opening them to unleash a stench so potent it clings to memory. Fermented fish guts, decomposed until they formed a thick, savory paste. They called it Kê-tsiap. It wasn't red, it wasn't sweet. It was a bold, briny punch of umami, an oceanic ancestor that would whisper its way into the culinary DNA of the world. When traders carried this sauce to Southeast Asia, it evolved again, adapted to new ingredients, new tastes, new cultures. British merchants fell in love with it, but lacking its original fishy soul, they reinvented it back home using mushrooms and walnuts. Soon, Kê-tsiap no longer resembled the thing it once was. It became whatever people wanted it to be. And then came America. Here tomatoes took the spotlight, plump, red, and overflowing with potential. Companies scrambled to bottle this new rush of tangy sweetness. But for every success story, there were failures. Ketchup brewed in back alleys with rotten tomatoes and chemical shortcuts, thickened with coal tar dyes and preservatives that sound more like industrial solvents than food. It became a medical scandal so widespread that the government stepped in, forcing ketchup to become safe, trustworthy, marketable. Yet even then, ketchup never stopped changing. It morphed into a symbol of childhood kitchens and drive-through windows, of the familiar comfort we crave in a chaotic world. We squeeze that bottle and taste memories, not history. But history is there. Tangy, fermented, surprisingly gruesome. And as we trace ketchup's evolution from rotting fish paste to global superstar, you'll see how every drop contains a story of transformation, civilizations adapting, desires shifting, and humanity finding flavor in the unlikeliest places. Tonight, that ordinary red bottle becomes something else entirely, a mystery waiting to be uncovered. To truly understand ketchup, we must travel back to a place where survival flavored every meal. Not a restaurant, not a supermarket, but the humid coasts of 17th century southern China, where fishermen rose before dawn, nets heavy with silver flashes of the sea, and a race against rot always looming. The heat was merciless. Fish spoiled quickly. The ocean provided abundance but demanded ingenuity. And so, necessity sparked an idea that would change the course of culinary history, though no one yet could imagine such a legacy. They gutted the day's catch, intestines, blood, and scraps deemed unworthy of trade, and packed the remains tightly into wooden barrels with handfuls of coarse salt. Spices were tossed in when available, not for sophistication but for survival. Then the barrels were sealed, left beneath the beating sun to ferment into something strange and powerful. Over weeks, the mixture broke down into a dark, liquid essence of the sea. Its aroma was sharp enough to wrinkle noses, its taste a revelation. A single splash could resurrect the dullest pot of rice, turning poverty into satisfaction. This was Kê-tsiap, brine of pickled fish, a name that would one day be echoed around the world, long after the fish itself had vanished from the recipe. Kê-tsiap was not meant as a luxury. It was a tool, a guardian against hunger, a concentrated burst of umami decades before scientists gave that flavor a name. It carried the ancient philosophy of Chinese cooking: balance, preservation, transformation. What others might discard, these coastal innovators elevated into treasure. Then came the outsiders, British and Dutch sailors, battered by months at sea and a diet of hardtack and despair, stumbled into bustling Chinese ports during the booming spice trade. There, amid stalls steaming with unfamiliar aromas, they tasted Kê-tsiap. It hit them like lightning, complex, salty, intoxicating, a sauce that could make anything taste like a victory. They returned again and again, pockets lined with coins, barrels loaded onto ships as though carrying a secret cure for blandness. But Europe had a problem. Fish guts, fermented under tropical skies, were not exactly easy to replicate back home. They had the name of the sauce, or something close to it, but not the recipe. They didn't know the fish. They didn't understand the fermentation. They lacked the climate that made Kê-tsiap possible. So they experimented, grabbing whatever savory ingredients they could: mushrooms, anchovies, walnuts. They boiled, mashed, strained, and seasoned, trying desperately to conjure the same magic, and failing again and again. Yet failure did not diminish fascination. The Europeans had tasted possibility, and their relentless attempts to recreate Kê-tsiap marked the beginning of a transformation. In their hands, the dark elixir evolved, drifting further from its birthplace. It was still called something like ketchup, but its soul was already changing, because this was never just a sauce. It was a migrant, a survivor, a shapeshifter that crossed oceans and cultures, adapting to the desires of those who craved it. And its journey had only begun. When Kê-tsiap first arrived in Europe, it tasted like adventure. It tasted like distant horizons, humid harbors, and a world larger than most Britons could fathom. But it also brought with it a maddening problem. The sailors who ferried those precious barrels back from Asia brought no instructions, no hint of how this magical substance came into being. And so, in 18th century British kitchens, curiosity twisted into obsession. Cooks stared at the inky sauce and guessed wildly. If it was salty and savory, surely mushrooms could mimic the flavor of the sea. And thus, the first great imitation took root: mushroom ketchup, with cauldrons of fungi boiled down into murky liquid, then dosed with salt, pepper, cloves, and occasionally wine. The result looked like Kê-tsiap and carried a rich umami bite. It was close enough, or close enough for now. But obsession doesn't settle for close. Walnut ketchup soon emerged, nutty and bitter, yet mysteriously fashionable. Then came anchovy ketchup, oyster ketchup, even ketchups made from grapes or elderberries. Anything that could be smashed, salted, fermented, or boiled into something dark and powerful enough to transform a dish. Each new attempt was advertised as the true recreation of the Eastern wonder. Every dinner table became a laboratory, every cookbook a battleground of sauce philosophy. Some recipes demanded week-long fermentations, guarded like trade secrets. Others instructed the cook to bury jars in the garden until the flavor is agreeable. Cooks experimented with vinegar, wine, pepper, ginger, and whatever else might conjure the spirit of China's prized elixir. The process was messy, sometimes disastrous, occasionally brilliant, but always driven by the hunger to capture a flavor that haunted the imagination. By the 1740s, this mania had become cultural currency. Well-heeled hosts set out ketchup as proof of sophistication, boasting that their version came closest to the original imported sauce. Serving ketchup became an act of social elevation, a performance of worldliness. Dinner guests admired not just the meal, but the connection it implied to global trade, to new worlds being mapped and exploited for their treasures. Ketchup, in Europe, was an edible souvenir of empire, but beneath that veneer of refinement lay frustration. For all their attempts, no European version truly matched the Chinese original. Yet in failing to replicate Kê-tsiap, the British unintentionally succeeded in creating a brand new category of condiments, one rooted in improvisation rather than tradition. Each experiment was a mutation, and each mutation edged ketchup further from its ancestral form. And yet, one ingredient remained conspicuously absent: the tomato. Red, vibrant, bursting with acidity, was everywhere in southern Europe, but in Britain it lingered under a shadow of fear. Members of the nightshade family were rumored to be poisonous, and many believed tomatoes could taint the blood or drive a person to illness. Aristocrats occasionally grew them in gardens for decoration, but few dared to eat them. They were botanical curiosities, admired from afar and never trusted on the plate. So ketchup continued evolving in strange directions, becoming more European by the decade. Earthy, nutty, experimental, but not yet the bright, tangy staple we know today. The tomato sat silently in the wings, misunderstood and unwanted, unaware that it would soon rewrite ketchup's future. Here in this age of imitation, Europe wasn't preserving a tradition. It was incubating a transformation, one that would leap the Atlantic, collide with new tastes, new industries, and new ambitions. The next revolution would not be fermented in barrels of fish or brewed from fungus. It would grow on a vine, glossy and red, waiting for its moment to change history. Ketchup's destiny pivoted in a single act of rebellion. In 1812, while most of America still eyed tomatoes with suspicion, whispering that they were poisonous, that they could rot the blood, Philadelphia scientist James Mees made a bold declaration. Tomatoes, he insisted, were not only edible, they were the very ingredient ketchup had been waiting for. He published a recipe that fused the skeptical fruit with the beloved British sauce. Tomato ketchup, the first of its kind to be recorded on American soil. Mees didn't see tomatoes as dangerous weeds from the nightshade family. He saw their brilliance, the bright acidity, the rich umami from natural glutamates, the way their essence could awaken a dish with just a spoonful. In his hands, the tomato was not something to fear. It was salvation. His recipe remained simple, far thinner than the ketchup we know today, and far too fragile to last more than a few days. But it cracked open a door that would never again be closed. As the decades advanced, American kitchens became laboratories of reinvention. The 1830s and 1840s saw a flurry of new recipes, each one thicker, sweeter, more ambitious. Cooks added vinegar for tang and sugar for balance. Spices like allspice, cloves, and cinnamon crept in, layering warmth into every crimson drop. Tomato ketchup separated itself from every European imitation, blossoming into something uniquely American, bold, sweet, and unapologetically flavorful. But any revolution carries shadows. Tomatoes, for all their virtues, spoiled quickly. especially once turned into a sauce and bottled in glass. Without refrigeration or modern canning techniques, early ketchup had a shelf life measured in days. A jar, left too long on the pantry shelf, transformed from treat to threat. Bubbling, molding, crawling with the unseen. Consumers learned to sniff, to doubt, to fear. They wanted the convenience of ketchup, but they didn't want to gamble with their health every time they opened a bottle. Enter the profiteers. Some manufacturers, chasing profit over principle, added preservatives that belonged in factories, not kitchens. Coal tar, yes, the same black industrial residue scraped from gas works, was used to restore ketchup's rich red hue once the tomatoes had dulled from age. Sodium benzoate and salicylic acid crept into recipes, masking the taste of spoilage while bacteria multiplied beneath the cork. Bottles were stamped with promises of safety and purity, even as their contents threatened illness. Ketchup had become a risk disguised as a condiment. And it wasn't a small risk. Reports surfaced of children falling sick. Food critics raised alarms. Mothers became wary. What had started as a daring celebration of tomatoes' redemption was suddenly a national scandal brewing on every dinner table. Americans loved their ketchup too much to let it become a menace. But love alone could not tame corruption. The country needed a hero, someone who would challenge the chaos, confront the rot, and rescue ketchup from the brink of betrayal. A man who believed that a condiment should be honest, that food should nourish, not deceive. Soon, one company would rise above the rest, stamp its name on the bottle, and promise purity with every squeeze. The revolution was not over. It was about to find its champion. Before ketchup had fully secured its place in American kitchens, it ventured down a strange, unsettling detour, one that promised salvation but delivered scandal. During the 1830s, a charismatic Ohio physician named Dr. John Cook Bennett stepped forward with a bold proclamation. Tomatoes, he insisted, were no mere food. So he did something audacious. He processed tomatoes into concentrated pill form and sold them as universal remedies. The idea caught fire. Pharmacies across the country stocked shelves with Bennett's tomato pills, promising vigor and vitality one swallow at a time. And then the transformation took an even stranger turn. Dinner, it seemed, had become health care by the spoonful. This medicinal myth did something remarkable. It helped erase America's lingering suspicion of tomatoes. Suddenly, eating them wasn't risky. It was responsible, a patriotic investment in personal longevity. Ketchup, once a curiosity, became a staple of health. But where there is belief, opportunists follow. As demand soared, unscrupulous manufacturers rushed to capitalize. Tomatoes were expensive, but deception was cheap. So they faked it, filling bottles with pulped pumpkin or apples, coloring it all with coal tar dyes to mimic the vibrant red of ripe fruit. They stabilized their counterfeit condiments with dangerous preservatives, chemicals easier to source than real tomatoes. These so-called medicinal ketchups were not cures. They were poisons masquerading as progress. American families, trusting the medical claims plastered across the labels, swallowed these fraudulent concoctions without hesitation. Children spooned down ketchup, believing it would protect them from illness. But instead, complaints surged. Nausea, sickness, worse. Something had gone terribly wrong. By the 1850s, investigations began to reveal the truth. The miracle had rotted from within. What had been advertised as healing was exposed as harmful, even deadly. Early government watchdogs, the ancestors of today's FDA, stepped in, documenting case after case of ketchup contaminated by filth and toxic additives. The scandal was spectacular and devastating. Once hailed as a lifesaver, ketchup now carried a taint of danger. Its promise of purity lay in ruins. Consumers recoiled. The nation that once swore ketchup would strengthen the body now questioned whether it belonged on the table at all. And yet, ketchup's story was not over, not by a long shot. Its renaissance would come from a meticulous innovator with a radical belief that food should be honest, that ingredients should be pure, and that ketchup could rise again, this time not as medicine, but as the most beloved condiment in America. Ketchup had fallen from grace. It needed a savior, someone capable of restoring its integrity, someone bold enough to rebuild trust, molecule by molecule. That savior arrived in the form of Henry John Heinz, the son of German immigrants in Pittsburgh, who had grown up selling vegetables from his mother's garden. From an early age, he believed that food was a contract between maker and buyer, sealed not by words but by honesty, and he carried that belief like a compass. By 1876, America's ketchup market was still a minefield of deceit. Bottles hid murky secrets, rotten tomatoes masked with dyes, chemical preservatives cloaked in fancy labels. The public wanted convenience, but they also wanted safety, and they were getting neither. Heinz saw opportunity in the wreckage. He envisioned a ketchup that was pure, safe, and so flawlessly produced that chemicals would become unnecessary. It was a radical dream in an era when most manufacturers viewed food safety as an inconvenient rumor. Heinz didn't rely on a single invention or a lucky accident. He engineered excellence, step by meticulous step. First came tomatoes, not just any tomatoes, but the ripest and richest, selected for high natural acidity. Then came vinegar, measured in precise quantities to extend shelf life without overpowering the flavor. The cooking process became an art form, long enough to concentrate taste and kill bacteria, yet gentle enough to avoid scorching. Every variable was studied, calibrated, perfected. But Heinz's revolution wasn't confined to the recipe. He dared to do something that terrified his competitors. He revealed everything. At a time when other factories hid behind brick walls and secrecy, Heinz installed clear glass windows. When others stuffed their ketchup into opaque brown bottles designed to disguise spoilage, Heinz bottled his in sparkling, transparent glass, placing purity under the spotlight. Seeing is believing, he understood, long before it became a marketing cliché. With one design choice, he turned suspicion into confidence. Factory tours soon became a spectacle. Women in pristine white aprons worked at gleaming equipment, an orchestrated demonstration of hygiene and order. Safety inspectors were not just tolerated, they were welcomed. Heinz even paid them room and board, all to prove he had nothing to hide. Every detail of his operation was a statement. Trust us, because we trust ourselves. Yet Heinz's true genius was sensory. He understood the American palate better than anyone. Frontier cooking favored bold, hearty flavors. Sugar had become a national obsession, so Heinz pushed sweetness further than any competitor dared, creating a ketchup that lit up the taste buds with a perfect sweet and sour tango. Its thickness was calculated with scientific precision, lush enough to coat a fry, but fluid enough to pour. The term mouthfeel hadn't been invented yet, but Heinz was already mastering it. The result was a symphony in red, vibrant, glossy, irresistibly smooth. It clung, it shimmered, it tasted like certainty. By 1905, Heinz was producing 5 million bottles a year. His ketchup wasn't just a product, it was the product, the undisputed gold standard. Families demanded it. Restaurants advertised it. Competitors scrambled to imitate it. Heinz had not only saved ketchup from corruption, he had turned it into an American icon. Purity, transparency, reliability. These principles became the foundation of modern food regulation itself. And every time a consumer twisted open one of those elegant, clear bottles, they were reminded of the man who believed that ketchup could and should be perfect. Ketchup was no longer a gamble, it was a guarantee. For all the drama, all the centuries of reinvention and scandal, the bottle sitting quietly in your refrigerator seems disarmingly simple. Turn it around, and the label offers just a short list of ingredients. Tomato concentrate, distilled vinegar, high fructose corn syrup or sugar, salt, onion powder, spices, and natural flavoring. 7 words to summarize a global phenomenon. But in food, simplicity on paper often hides remarkable complexity in practice. Start with the foundation. Tomato concentrate. Behind that sterile phrase lies a process of transformation that would astound early ketchup makers. Fresh tomatoes, often cultivated specifically for processing, are washed, sorted, and heated until their structure breaks down. Roughly 95% of their water is removed. What remains is pure essence, a dense matrix of natural glutamates and flavor compounds that form ketchup's unmistakable, savory core. Those rich tomato solids give the sauce its body, its luxurious cling, its ability to coat a fry without dripping away in defeat. Next comes vinegar, but not the kind you splash into a salad dressing at home. Distilled vinegar in ketchup is engineered to precision, typically around 5% acidity, no more, no less. It preserves. It brightens. It cuts through the sweetness like a spotlight in darkness. Vinegar is the guardrail that keeps ketchup vibrant and safe even months after opening. Without it, we'd be back in the era of bubbling bottles and dubious odors. Then we reach the most controversial element: sugar, often in the form of high fructose corn syrup in the United States. A single tablespoon of ketchup contains about 4 grams of sugar, nearly a teaspoon. That seems innocuous until you realize how often we pour, dip, and drown our food in it. Ketchup is sweeter than many dessert toppings, and that's no accident. Decades of sensory research have revealed a neurological sweet spot known as the bliss point, where sugar, salt, and umami synchronize to create near irresistible craving. Ketchup doesn't just flavor food. It encourages you to reach back for more. Salt plays its own key role, not merely as a seasoning but as a chemical amplifier. It sharpens tomato brightness, tempers acidity, enhances sweetness, and strengthens the entire flavor structure. In combination with sugar and umami, salt doesn't just add taste, It compels desire. Then come the shadows of the ingredient list: onion powder, spices, natural flavoring. These are the storytellers, crafting the notes that linger just out of reach of conscious description. They might include celery salt for herbal depth, mustard derivatives for subtle heat, perhaps a whisper of clove or cinnamon to tease the senses with warmth. The exact blend is closely guarded, proprietary, protected, essential. It's not meant to be individually detected. It's meant to be remembered as something you can't quite define, but instantly identify. And that vague term, natural flavoring? Legally, it can encompass dozens of compounds derived from plant sources but processed until only chemists could recognize their origins. Each is chosen for a purpose: to ensure that no matter where you are, Kansas or Kuala Lumpur, the ketchup tastes exactly like ketchup. Over decades, food scientists have adjusted this balance by tenths of a percent, running thousands of taste tests to tune the formula into universality. The result is a condiment so engineered, so refined, that it seems almost inevitable. Ketchup is not simple. It is precision disguised as comfort, a masterpiece masquerading as a side dish. But there is one ingredient that represents the most dramatic transformation in ketchup's modern history, one that fundamentally altered the product while remaining virtually invisible to consumers. It's not a spice, it's not a vegetable, it's a grain, and its dominance reveals how ketchup became less about tomatoes and more about economics. The villain, or hero, depending on who you ask, is high-fructose corn syrup. To understand how corn conquered the tomato, we need to peel back a layer of American industrial policy. In the 1970s, a revolution quietly unfolded in U.S. agriculture. Federal subsidies encouraged farmers to grow mountains of corn. At the same time, tariffs and global politics made traditional sugar far more expensive. Food corporations faced a choice: raise prices or find a cheaper sweetener. Chemists provided the answer. By using specialized enzymes to break down cornstarch, they created a syrup where a large share of the glucose is converted into fructose, the sweeter of the two sugars. The result: a liquid sweetener that was cheap, sweet, and incredibly easy to mix into processed foods. And ketchup makers? They didn't hesitate. The transition happened so quietly that most consumers never even noticed the label change. But this switch rewired ketchup from the inside out. Taste shifted, sweeter, smoother, more appealing after years of consumer taste tests. Texture improved. HFCS blends effortlessly, preventing the crystallization issues that plagued high sucrose formulas. Profitability soared. Every squeeze delivered cost savings. But beneath these improvements lurked consequences no one fully anticipated. By the mid-1980s, this corn-based sweetener had infiltrated nearly every aisle of the supermarket. Soda, bread, yogurt, cereal, salad dressing, and yes, ketchup, all became delivery systems for a concentrated calorie source humans were never evolutionarily prepared for. As HFCS consumption skyrocketed, so did obesity rates, diabetes diagnoses, and metabolic disorders across America. Correlation doesn't equal causation, but the timeline is hard to ignore. Suddenly, that innocent squirt of ketchup beside your burger wasn't just a condiment. It was part of a sweeping transformation in the American diet, one engineered in boardrooms and government offices rather than home kitchens or farms. In recent years, backlash has grown. Nutritionists raised alarms. Parents demanded alternatives. Heinz itself, after decades of devotion to HFCS, introduced versions that use cane sugar, labeled with comforting words like organic or simply. But look at the shelves. The majority of ketchup bottles worldwide still contain corn-derived sweetness, the legacy of a policy decision made half a century ago. So the next time you dunk a fry or smother a hot dog, consider this. Behind that familiar red bottle lies a global system of agriculture, health, and industry. Tomatoes may give ketchup its color, but corn, sweet, subsidized, and everywhere, gives it power. From its humble origins as fermented fish sauce sloshing around clay jars in Chinese seaports, ketchup has achieved something no emperor, no missionary, no multinational corporation fully accomplished before. It conquered the world through flavor. Today, you can step into a fast food shop in Tokyo, a roadside stall in Lagos, a bustling cafe in Buenos Aires, or a school cafeteria in Stockholm, and you'll find that familiar squeeze bottle, red and ready. Not as a foreign curiosity, not as an American novelty, but as a naturalized citizen of local cuisine, seamlessly integrated into daily life. This is the final and perhaps most astonishing chapter of Ketchup's journey. Its evolution from a regional fermented fish sauce into a global comfort language. But Ketchup's conquest isn't a story of domination through force. It's a story of adaptation, of a condiment that shapeshifts to survive. In the Philippines, the ketchup bottle isn't always red. It can be bright orange, flavored from mashed bananas and sweetened to match the Filipino palate. Born from wartime tomato shortages, banana ketchup is now a national staple, beloved with fried chicken and spaghetti alike. In India, ketchup often comes with spices, chili heat layered atop that familiar sweet tang, a hybrid that feels both adventurous and instantly recognizable. In Japan, ketchup leaves behind some of its sugary indulgence, becoming savory and subtle. It acts not as a dominant sauce but a culinary partner, flavoring classics like omuris, fried rice wrapped in a delicate omelette, drizzled with artistic lines of red. And in Germany, ketchup doesn't just sit beside the sausage. It becomes the sausage's identity. Currywurst, the beloved street food of Berlin, marries ketchup with curry powder, creating a condiment so iconic that it inspired museums and fan clubs. Every nation remixes ketchup to fit its soul. The numbers are staggering. The global ketchup market now exceeds $2 billion annually. Americans alone consume around 3 bottles per household every year. And unlike soda, snacks, or fast food, ketchup has largely escaped cultural backlash. Because ketchup doesn't demand loyalty to any one cuisine. It enhances whatever culture it enters. Yet this worldwide success carries hidden consequences. As ketchup's red tide spreads, local condiment traditions fade. There was a time when every family had their own sauce recipe. Grandmother Bustedier's secret blend of preserved fruit, chili, vinegar, herbs. Those bottles once represented identity, heritage, pride. Today, they're often replaced by the globally standardized taste of packaged ketchup. The homogenization of flavor is one of globalization's quietest yet most profound cultural shifts. And yet, there's another side to this story. For immigrants tasting home in a foreign land, for children afraid to try something new until they see that familiar red, for soldiers stationed half a world away, ketchup becomes more than a condiment. It becomes comfort, connection, a reminder that no matter where we travel, some things remain delightfully the same. The triumph of ketchup tells us something deep about humanity, our longing for the predictable in a world that constantly changes. We reach for that red bottle, not because it's exotic, but because it's familiar. Because ketchup isn't just a sauce. Ketchup is a passport, one that lets us feel at home anywhere on Earth. So here we stand, at the end of a journey spanning centuries and continents, staring at that familiar bottle with eyes newly opened. What began as a desperate, pungent experiment to preserve fish in the humid ports of southern China has rippled through history in ways few could have imagined. It became a culinary obsession in Britain, a curious and sometimes dangerous novelty in Victorian America, an industrial triumph in the age of mass production, and finally, a global phenomenon embraced in homes, restaurants, and cafeterias, from Tokyo to Lagos. Ketchup's story is, in essence, humanity's story, a miniature mirror of our ingenuity, our daring, our flaws, and our relentless drive to improve and adapt. Every time you squeeze that bottle, you are not just adding flavor to food. You are participating in a ritual that connects you to generations long past, to Hokkien fishermen laboring over barrels of fermented fish, British sailors smuggling dark sauces across oceans, American entrepreneurs like Heinz obsessing over purity and perfection, and billions of people across the globe who have found comfort in that delicate dance of sweetness, acidity, salt, and umami. A single drop of ketchup carries 1,000 stories, centuries of experimentation, and the echoes of countless kitchens and dining tables. Yet ketchup's legacy is more than nostalgia or flavor. It is a warning, too. The very formula that makes it irresistible, perfected over decades of research, is engineered to engage our neurological bliss point, nudging us toward repetition, craving, and satisfaction beyond simple taste. The industrial choices behind it, from the adoption of high-fructose corn syrup to precise cooking techniques for shelf stability, show how agricultural policy and corporate innovation quietly shape what we consume, often in ways invisible to the consumer. What seems ordinary, convenient, and familiar masks centuries of human decision-making, trade-offs, and even manipulation. And still, this is only one chapter in a much larger story. Ketchup illustrates how something humble can transform into something universal, how taste can travel across oceans, and how culture adapts and absorbs, borrowing and reinventing. It reminds us that the foods we take for granted are not inert. They are living artifacts, the product of experimentation, ambition, creativity, and sometimes deception. They connect us to history in ways that are subtle but profound. The next time you reach for that red bottle, pause. Think of the barrels of fermented fish in China, the ambitious cooks of 18th century Britain, the medicine peddlers of America, and the factories of Heinz, perfecting every drop for clarity, sweetness, and balance. Remember that every squirt carries more than flavor. It carries history. And if this story has changed how you see that simple red condiment, consider the countless other ordinary objects around you. Each one carries astonishing histories hidden in plain sight. Subscribe now and join me as we uncover the secret stories behind the everyday things that surround you. Because once you start seeing the hidden history, you will never look at your world the same way again.